The evening air was warm as Maya Peterson raised her glass of champagne on the rooftop bar. The New York City skyline sparkled around her as she laughed with her law school friends. After 3 tough years at Columbia Law School, she had finally made it. Graduation day had been perfect, her parents beaming with pride as she walked across the stage in her cap and gown. "To the future lawyers who will change the world," shouted her friend Tina, and everyone clinked their glasses together. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it at first, wanting to stay in this perfect moment a little longer. But when it buzzed again, something told her she should check it. The screen showed an international number from Guatemala. "Hello." Maya stepped away from the music, pressing one finger against her other ear to hear better. "Maya? Maya, can you hear me?" The voice was shaky and scared. Her roommate Sophia from the volunteer teaching program they had signed up for. "Sophia, what's wrong? I can barely hear you." "The police came to our apartment," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "They took me in for questioning about some robbery near the school. They kept asking about you two. I don't know what's happening." Maya's stomach tightened. She had delayed her job at a big law firm to spend 3 months teaching English to children in Guatemala. It was supposed to be her last adventure before real adult life began. Now Sophia sounded terrified. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Maya asked, already walking toward the exit, waving goodbye to her confused friends. "I'm fine. They let me go after a few hours." "But Maya," Sophia paused. "I think you should delay your flight. Something weird is going on." But Maya didn't delay her flight. She had committed to those kids, and a minor police mix-up wasn't going to stop her. She called her dad just to be safe. James Peterson had been an FBI agent for almost 30 years before retiring last year. He would know what to do. "It's probably nothing, Dad," Maya said, phone tucked between her ear and shoulder as she packed her suitcase in her tiny New York apartment. Sophia gets nervous easily. "I don't like it," her father said in that calm, serious voice she'd known all her life. The voice that had guided her through everything from playground bullies to college applications. "At least register with the embassy as soon as you land." "Yes, Dad," she said with the slight eye roll that adult children perfect. "I promise." 26 hours later, Maya walked through the crowded airport in Guatemala City. The heat hit her immediately as she stepped outside, looking for the driver from the teaching program. A man held a sign with her name, but something felt off. He didn't have the program logo on his shirt like they had told her to expect. "Are you from New Horizons teaching program?" she asked in Spanish, proud of her fluency after years of study. The man just nodded and reached for her bag. Maya hesitated, but a second man appeared beside her. "Maya Peterson?" he asked, showing her a badge too quickly for her to read it properly. "We need you to come with us. Simple questions about your roommate." "My roommate? Sophia, is she okay?" Maya asked, her heart racing now. "Can I see your ID again?" The second man gripped her arm. "Come with us now." Maya's law school training kicked in. "I want to call the U.S. Embassy," she said firmly. "And I want to call my father." The men exchanged glances. "Your phone," the first one said, holding out his hand. When Maya refused, they took it anyway. The last thing she managed was a quick emergency text to her father. Just 3 words. "Dad. Trouble. Guatemala." 3 days later, James Peterson was sitting at his desk in their family home in Virginia, going through old case files for a book he was writing about his FBI career. The phone rang, and the international number made his heart skip a beat. The voice on the other end wasn't Maya. It was a U.S. Embassy worker speaking in the careful, measured tones that James recognized immediately. The voice of someone delivering bad news while trying to remain professional. "Mr. Peterson, I'm calling about your daughter, Maya. She's being detained at the Central Detention Facility in Guatemala City. There's been some kind of mix-up. They're claiming she's involved in an armed robbery, but there's clearly been a mistake." James Peterson sat very still, the way he had taught himself to do during crises throughout his FBI career. His mind was already making lists, calling up contacts, planning routes. "I'll be on the next flight," he said, his voice steady even as his hand gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Tell my daughter to say nothing until I get there." As he hung up, James Peterson knew this would be the most important case of his life. He had spent 28 years bringing criminals to justice. Now he would need all that experience to save his daughter from a justice system gone terribly wrong. James Peterson hadn't slept a wink. The overnight flight to Guatemala City felt endless as his mind raced through all the possibilities. He kept checking his watch, calculating the hours his daughter had already spent in detention. Each minute stretched like a lifetime. "More coffee, sir?" the flight attendant asked. James nodded, his eyes red-rimmed but alert. He packed light. One carry-on with clothes and toiletries, but his real luggage was invisible. 30 years of FBI contacts, training, and experience. He'd handled hostage situations, international drug rings, and terrorism cases, but nothing had prepared him for this hollow feeling in his chest. This wasn't just another case. This was Maya. He pulled out a worn photo from his wallet. Maya at her high school graduation, grinning with that determined look she'd had since she was 5. She'd always wanted to help people. That's why she chose law school. That's why she wanted to teach in Guatemala before starting her corporate job. "We'll land in approximately 20 minutes, the captain announced over the speaker. James tucked the photo away and opened his notebook. He'd already filled 10 pages with notes and questions. Why Maya? Why now? What was the actual charge? He knew from experience that in some countries, foreigners became easy targets. A bribe here, a fine there, it was an old game. But his FBI training told him there was always more to the story. The heat hit him like a wall as he stepped off the plane. Guatemala City sprawled below the airport, a mix of modern buildings and crowded neighborhoods climbing up the surrounding hills. James headed straight for the U.S. Embassy, bypassing the usual tourist entrance. "I'm James Peterson," he told the security guard, showing his retired FBI credentials. "I believe someone here called me about my daughter." 15 minutes later, James sat across from Thomas Wilson, a young embassy official with neatly combed hair and a nervous habit of adjusting his tie. "Mr. Peterson, we're doing everything we can," Wilson said, shuffling papers. "But the local authorities are being difficult." "What exactly are they claiming she did?" James asked, his voice level despite his rising frustration. Wilson slid a file across the desk. "They say she matches the description of an American woman involved in a jewelry store robbery last month. The store owner was hurt. They're treating it as armed robbery with assault." James opened the file. Inside was a grainy security camera photo of a woman with dark hair. The resemblance to Maya was there, but any decent investigator would spot the differences immediately. The woman in the photo was at least 10 years older, with a different facial structure. "This is their evidence?" "A blurry photo of someone who vaguely looks like my daughter." James couldn't keep the edge from his voice now. Wilson looked uncomfortable. "There's more. Maya's passport was reported stolen last week, correct?" James nodded. Maya had emailed him about it, saying someone had taken it from their volunteer housing. "Well, they're claiming her passport was found at the scene." Everything suddenly clicked into place for James. This wasn't random bad luck. Someone had targeted Maya specifically. "I need to see her. Now." James stood up. "That's the problem," Wilson said, not meeting his eyes. "The detention center is claiming they have no record of her." James felt his blood run cold. In his FBI career, when prisoners suddenly disappeared from records, it never meant anything good. "Then we have a problem," James said quietly. "Because I didn't fly 5,000 miles to be told my daughter doesn't exist." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts until he found what he was looking for: Carlos Mendez, a former DEA agent he'd worked with years ago on a joint task force. Carlos had retired back to Guatemala City to care for his aging mother. "I'm calling in some favors," James told Wilson, "and I suggest you do the same. Because in about 6 hours, I'm either seeing my daughter or I'm calling every news outlet from here to Washington." As James stepped outside to make his call, the Guatemala City traffic humped and swerved below. He thought about Maya sitting in some cell, probably terrified but trying to stay brave. His daughter had always been strong, but she was up against a system designed to make people disappear. "Carlos, it's James Peterson. I need your help." He paused, watching the embassy flag flutter against the blue sky. "My daughter's life depends on it." Maya's back ached from sleeping on the cold concrete floor. 5 days had passed since men in uniform had taken her from the airport. 5 days in this crowded cell with 7 other women, sharing a single toilet that barely worked and fighting over the thin trickle of water that came from a rusty pipe twice a day. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb Anna, the older woman sleeping beside her. Anna had been here for 3 months with no trial date, accused of a crime she swore she didn't commit, just like Maya. "Good morning," whispered Rosa, a young teacher who had been arrested during a protest. Her English was good. She had studied in California for a year. "You sleep okay?" Maya shook her head. Not really. She never slept well here. The sounds were always too much. Crying, guards shouting, doors slamming. "They bring new girl last night," Rosa said, nodding toward a huddled figure in the corner. "She's scared." Maya looked over at the thin woman curled into herself. She couldn't have been more than 20. Making a decision, Maya grabbed her precious cup of water, half her daily ration, and walked over to the newcomer. "Hey," she said gently in Spanish. "I'm Maya. You want some water?" The girl looked up with red-rimmed eyes and took the cup with shaking hands. "Gracias," she whispered. "I'm Lucia." As Lucia sipped the water, Maya did what she'd been doing since her first day here. She listened to another story of someone caught in a broken system. Lucia had been arrested while waiting for a bus, accused of selling drugs. No evidence, no lawyer, just thrown in here and forgotten. Maya had already collected 6 such stories, carefully memorizing names, dates, and details. Her law school professors would be proud of how meticulously she documented each case. If she ever got out of here, these stories wouldn't stay buried in this cell. "Stand for count," a guard shouted, banging his baton against the metal bars. The women scrambled to line up, knowing that being slow meant no food that day. Maya helped Anna to her feet, supporting the older woman's frail frame. After count came breakfast, a bowl of watery porridge that Maya had learned to eat without thinking about the taste or the occasional bugs she found floating in it. Food was fuel, nothing more. "Peterson." A different guard appeared at the cell door. "Visitor." Maya's heart jumped. Her dad? The embassy? She'd been asking to call her father every day, but they always refused. The guard led her down a long hallway, past cells packed with women in similar conditions. Maya memorized the layout, counting doors and noting which guards had keys to which sections. The lawyer in her brain never stopped working, even as the human part of her was terrified. They entered a small room with a metal table bolted to the floor. Sitting there, looking older than she remembered, was her father. "Dad." Maya moved to hug him, but the guard pushed her into the chair. "No touching," he snapped before stepping back to the doorway. James Peterson's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his daughter. Her face was thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair hung limp, and her once clean law school graduation outfit was now dirty and rumpled. But her eyes, they still had that Peterson determination. "Maya," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "I'm okay." "How did you find me?" "They said no one knew I was here." "I've still got a few tricks up my sleeve," he said with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm getting you out of here." "They say I robbed a jewelry store," Maya said, leaning forward. "Dad, I just got off the plane. I didn't do anything." "I know," he said firmly. "Your passport was stolen, then used in the robbery. Someone planned this." The guard shifted, clearly listening to their conversation. Maya lowered her voice. "Dad, it's not just me. There are other women here who've been forgotten. Anna's been waiting 3 months for a trial. Lucia was just grabbed off the street. Rosa was at a peaceful protest." James nodded slightly, understanding immediately. This wasn't just about Maya anymore. 5 minutes, the guard announced. "Listen carefully," James whispered, sliding his hand across the table. Between his fingers was a tiny piece of paper. "I have a plan, but I need you to hang on a little longer. Can you do that?" Maya took the paper, slipping it into her shoe. "I'm a Peterson," she said with a ghost of her old smile. "We don't give up." As the guard pulled her away, James called out, "I love you, kiddo. Stay strong." Walking back to her cell, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in 5 days. Hope. James Peterson sat in his hotel room, surrounded by papers pinned to the walls. He'd turned the small space into a command center, just like he used to do during his FBI days. Maps of Guatemala City, printouts of local police reports, and photos of officials he needed to track down covered every surface. His phone rang. It was Carlos, his old DEA friend. "James, I found someone who can help," Carlos said in a hushed voice. "Her name is Elena Vasquez. She runs a group that helps people who've been wrongfully locked up. She lost her sister to the system 3 years ago." "Can we trust her?" James asked, his years of FBI training making him cautious. "With your life," Carlos replied. "She's helped dozens of families. The officials hate her, which means she's doing something right." 2 hours later, James sat in the back of a small coffee shop far from the tourist areas. The door opened, and a woman in her 40s with determined eyes and a quick step walked in. She scanned the room, spotted James, and came directly to his table. "Mr. Peterson," she asked, not offering her hand. "Carlos told me about your daughter." James nodded. "Can you help me?" Elena took a seat, leaning forward. "What the police did to your daughter happens all the time here. They grab foreigners, make up charges, then wait for families to pay them off. But your case is different." She pulled out a small notebook. "The jewelers who were robbed, they're connected to big people. People with power." "Why target my daughter specifically?" James asked. Elena shrugged. "Maybe random bad luck. Or maybe," she studied him, "Carlos said you were FBI. Who did you put away that might have connections here?" The question hit James like a punch to the gut. In 30 years, he'd helped lock up hundreds of criminals. Many had sworn revenge. "I need to see their evidence," James said, avoiding the question for now. "The security footage, witness statements, everything." Elena shook her head. "They won't give you that through official channels. But I know people." She paused. "I'd also know 3 journalists who've been investigating the detention centers. They've documented dozens of cases like your daughter's." James leaned back, thinking. In his FBI days, he'd always followed the rules. But his daughter didn't have time for rules now. "Introduce me to these journalists," he said finally. The next day, James met with 3 young reporters in the back room of a small newspaper office. Louis, the oldest at maybe 30, spread photos across the table. "We've been tracking detention cases for over a year," he explained. "Americans, Europeans, Canadians, all grabbed, all pressured to pay fees for their release." His colleague Pilar nodded. "We've found a pattern. The money gets split between the arresting officers, jail guards, and senior officials. They have monthly targets to meet." James studied the photos, handwritten logs showing payment amounts, pictures taken secretly of money changing hands, lists of detained foreigners with dollar figures next to their names. "This is big," James said. "Why haven't you published it?" The 3rd journalist, Diego, laughed bitterly. "Last reporter who tried was found beaten near the border. The paper fired him to avoid controversy." Back in his hotel, James called Elena. "I need to get a message to Maya," he said. "And I need someone inside that detention center." "There's a guard," Elena said after a moment. "His daughter disappeared in the system 5 years ago. He helps us sometimes. He might get a message to Maya." That night, as rain pounded the hotel windows, James wrote a detailed note to his daughter. He explained his plan and what he needed from her, names of guards, details about the jail layout, and most importantly, as many stories from other women as she could gather. The guard would smuggle in a small notebook for her to write in. As James sealed the note in a plastic bag to keep it dry, his phone lit up with a message from Louis. "Found something big. The woman they say robbed the jewelry store. She was arrested in Colombia 3 months ago. Your daughter's case is completely fake." James stared at the message, feeling a mix of relief and rage. They had proof now, proof that could free Maya. But he also knew that people who set up his daughter wouldn't give up easily. He picked up his phone again and called a number he hadn't used in years, his former boss at the FBI. It was time to bring in the big guns. The small notebook made its way back to James through Elena's network. He opened it with shaking hands, recognizing Maya's neat handwriting immediately. She had filled every page with information, names of guards, shift schedules, cell locations, and heartbreaking stories from the women locked up with her. "She's still thinking like a lawyer," James muttered proudly as he copied the information onto his hotel room wall. His phone rang. It was Thomas Wilson from the U.S. Embassy. "Peterson, I've been trying to help, but I keep hitting walls," Wilson said, sounding frustrated. "Every time I file paperwork, it disappears. Every time I schedule a hearing, it gets cancelled." "Someone's blocking you," James said, not surprised. "I need a favor, Thomas. I need you to check a name for me." As James suspected, his former FBI boss had pulled strings. A name from his past had surfaced: Victor Diaz, a drug trafficker James had helped put away 15 years ago. Diaz had been released 2 years ago and had family connections in Guatemala. "This is personal," James realized. Maya wasn't randomly targeted. She was being punished because of him. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Lewis, the journalist, carrying a large envelope. "We found it," Lewis said excitedly once they were inside. "Security footage from the jewelry store robbery. And look who's in it." The grainy video showed a woman with dark hair, similar to Maya's, robbing the store. But when Lewis paused the video and zoomed in, James could clearly see it wasn't his daughter. More importantly, Lewis had found arrest records from Colombia confirming the real robber had been caught months ago. "This proves Maya is innocent," James said, hope rising in his chest. Lewis nodded. "Yes, but there's more. We tracked the stolen passport. A police officer sold it to someone the day after Maya reported it stolen. This was all planned." James added this information to his wall. The pieces were coming together, but he still needed more evidence to force Maya's release. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Come quick, important news." 20 minutes later, James sat across from Elena in the same coffee shop. Her face was grim. "Maya is sick," she said directly. "Our contact says there's a fever going through the detention center. No medicine, bad water. Many women are ill." James felt his heart race. "How bad?" "Bad enough. The guards are worried it will spread to them. Some are refusing to come to work." James stood up abruptly. "I need to get her out. Now." "We're close," Elena assured him. "The journalists are ready to publish everything. I've contacted international human rights groups, but we need one more piece of evidence." She explained that a senior official named Rodriguez was in charge of the detention program. If they could prove he was taking money, the whole system would be exposed. "My contact says Rodriguez is meeting someone tonight to collect payments. We need pictures, recordings, anything to prove it." James thought about his FBI training. Surveillance was something he knew well. That night, James and Louise hid in a car across from an expensive restaurant. When Rodriguez emerged with another man, they followed at a distance. The men entered a quiet park, and James used a long-range camera to capture images of them exchanging an envelope. Louise had a directional microphone pointed at them, recording their conversation. "We got it," Louise whispered excitedly as the men parted ways. They were talking about foreign guests and processing fees. It's all code for the detention scheme. Back at the hotel, James reviewed everything they had collected. Maya's detailed accounts from inside, the security footage proving she wasn't the robber, evidence of the passport theft, financial records showing money changing hands, and now photos and recordings of Rodriguez himself discussing the scheme. It was time to make their move. James called Thomas Wilson at the embassy. "I need a meeting with the Deputy Minister of Justice," he said firmly. "Tomorrow morning. And bring backup." As James prepared for the confrontation that could free his daughter, he got another text from Elena's contact inside the detention center. "Your daughter's fever is getting worse. She needs a doctor soon." James closed his eyes briefly, fighting back panic. Then he picked up his phone again. "Change of plans," he told Wilson. "We're doing this tonight." Rain pounded against the windows of the government building as James Peterson waited outside the deputy minister's office. It was nearly midnight, but James had pulled every string, called in every favor, and made enough noise that the Deputy Minister of Justice had agreed to an emergency meeting. Thomas Wilson from the embassy sat beside him, looking nervous but determined. On James's other side sat Elena and Lewis, both carrying folders full of evidence. None of them spoke. The stakes were too high for small talk. The door finally opened and a secretary motioned them in. Deputy Minister Herrera sat behind a massive wooden desk, his face a mask of annoyance. "This better be important," he said in heavily accented English. "It's very late." James stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the desk. My daughter, Maya Peterson, has been wrongfully detained for 22 days. She's now seriously ill. This ends tonight. Herrera didn't touch the folder. There are proper channels for this kind of complaint. We tried those, Thomas Wilson cut in. Someone has been blocking our requests. James opened the folder and began laying out evidence piece by piece. The security footage showing the real robber. The Colombian arrest records proving she had been caught months ago. The photos of Maya's stolen passport changing hands. The financial records showing payments to officials. This is all very interesting, Herrera said, his expression unchanged. But it proves nothing about your daughter's case. James had expected this. He nodded to Lewis, who pulled out his laptop. A recording from the park played clearly. Rodriguez's voice discussing special guests and processing fees for detained foreigners. When the recording mentioned specific names, including Herrera's own cousin, the deputy minister's face finally showed emotion, fear. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "There's more," James said calmly, sliding forward a USB drive. "This contains copies of everything, the evidence, the recordings, and statements from 7 other women who've been wrongfully detained with my daughter. In 2 hours, it will be published by newspapers in Mexico City, New York, and Washington, D.C. Herrera's face paled. "You're bluffing." Elena stepped forward. "My organization has been documenting cases like Maya's for 3 years. We have enough evidence to embarrass not just your department, but your entire government." Thomas Wilson cleared his throat. The U.S. State Department is very concerned about these allegations. An official inquiry would be unfortunate for international relations. Herrera stood up abruptly. "This is blackmail." "This is justice," James corrected him, his voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside him. "My daughter walks free tonight, along with the 7 women in her cell. All by morning, your name will be on front pages around the world." The next 6 hours were the longest of James's life. Herrera made calls, shouted at subordinates, and tried repeatedly to negotiate. James refused to budge. Elena provided legal paperwork for each woman's release. Lewis stayed in contact with his newspaper, ready to publish if anything went wrong. As dawn broke over Guatemala City, James stood outside the detention center's back gate. His heart pounded as a door finally opened. Maya came out first, supported by Anna and Rosa. She looked thin and pale, her eyes bright with fever. Behind them came the other women, Lucia, and 3 others whose stories Maya had documented in her notebook. When Maya saw her father, she tried to run to him but stumbled. James caught her, holding her as if she might break. "Dad," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You did it." "We did it," he corrected her, including everyone who had helped with a glance. Embassy vehicles waited to take them to safety. As James helped Maya into the first car, she grabbed his arm. "The others," she said urgently. "There are dozens more women in there, innocent women." James looked at his daughter's feverish but determined face and saw himself in her, the same stubborn commitment to justice that had defined his career. "First we get you well," he promised. "Then we come back for the others." Maya nodded and leaned against him as the car pulled away from the detention center. She was free, but James knew that for both of them, this case was far from over. 3 months later, Maya stood in front of her bathroom mirror in her parents' Virginia home. The face looking back at her had changed. She had gained back most of the weight she'd lost in detention, but her eyes were different, older, more determined. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Ready?" Maya took a deep breath. Today was important. Today, they were taking the next step. Downstairs, James waited by the front door. He had postponed his retirement plans, accepting a position with a State Department task force on Americans detained abroad. The evidence they'd gathered in Guatemala had sparked investigations in 3 countries. "Nervous?" he asked as Maya joined him. She shook her head, just ready to get started. The law firm that had once offered Maya a high-paying corporate job had been calling weekly, still holding her position, but Maya had made a different choice. Today, she was starting work at the International Justice Project, a non-profit that helped people wrongfully detained around the world. "Your mom would be proud of you," James said as they drove. "She always said you had more heart than brains." Maya smiled at the mention of her mother, who had passed away when Maya was in college. She also said that being safe isn't the same as being happy. At the office, Maya was shown to a small desk piled with case files. Her boss, Diane, had been impressed by what Maya and her father had accomplished in Guatemala. "You have first-hand experience that most advocates don't have," Diane had told her during the interview. "You understand what it's like to be forgotten in the system." Maya picked up the first file. Inside was a photo of a young teacher from Ohio who had been arrested while volunteering in Thailand. The circumstances were painfully familiar. As Maya began making notes, her phone rang. It was Rosa, one of the women who had been released with her. After returning to Guatemala City, Rosa had started working with Elena's human rights organization. "We did it," Rosa exclaimed. "The International Court agreed to hear our case. They're sending investigators." Maya felt tears in her eyes. The petition they had filed, featuring testimony from all 8 women who had been released that night, was moving forward. It could help dozens more women still trapped in the detention center. "That's amazing, Rosa. Elena must be thrilled. She says to tell your father thank you again. Without his evidence, this wouldn't be happening." After the call, Maya walked to the window. Across the street, a coffee shop was filled with people going about their normal lives. 3 months ago, she had been fighting for water in a cramped cell. The contrast still shocked her sometimes. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Anna, the older woman who had shared her cell. Anna had moved to Mexico to live with her daughter and was slowly recovering from her ordeal. "Thinking of you today," the message read. "You promised to remember us. I knew you would." Maya texted back, "Always." That evening, James picked Maya up from work. "How was your first day?" "Good. Busy." Maya hesitated. "Dad, I got a call from a reporter at the Washington Post. They want to do a story about what happened." "About all of it?" James nodded slowly. They had avoided publicity since returning home, focusing instead on healing and building their legal case. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it." Maya looked out the window. "If we talk publicly, it might help other families, but it also means reliving everything." James reached over and squeezed her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." At home, Maya went to her bedroom and opened her laptop. She had been working on something for weeks, a detailed account of her time in detention, combined with the stories of the 7 women who had shared her cell. She had promised them she would make sure they weren't forgotten. She typed a new title at the top of the document, "Not Just Me, Stories from a Broken System." As Maya began to write, she thought about Lucia, who had been grabbed off the street, Anna, who had been waiting for a trial that never came, and all the others whose names she had memorized during those dark days. "This isn't just my story," she wrote. "It's about what happens when justice stops being about truth and starts being about power. It's about people who are forgotten because they don't have someone to fight for them. But most of all, it's about the fight that's just beginning." Maya looked at the photograph on her desk, the 8 women standing together on the day of their release, tired but free. She had made them a promise that day, and she intended to keep it.